Okay, so dear colleagues, thank you very much for joining our webinar today. Thank you for listening in and participation from across the region and the world. We're very happy that you're here. My name is Marie-Sophie Pedersen, and I work as Humanitarian and Disaster Risk Reduction Analyst with the UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. And I'll briefly introduce this webinar before handing over to colleagues in Nepal. So I'm here on behalf of our UN Women Regional Humanitarian Advisor, who unfortunately sends her apologies, Smriti Ariel, but she will also watch the webinar later. So this webinar is organized on behalf of the Regional Gender in Humanitarian Action Working Group, which is co-chaired by OCHA, the Asia Disaster Preparedness Center, and UN Women. One of the core functions of this regional group is to facilitate learning on gender and humanitarian action. And this webinar is one of the first events in a series of learning events that we're planning for the year. Our group has chosen women's leadership in humanitarian action as one of our key themes for this year, and then also the theme of this webinar. This theme is, of course, in line with the Grand Bargain, commitments to participation, revolution, and localization. And we strongly believe that for those commitments in the Grand Bargain to be achieved, we must prioritize women's leadership and meaningful participation in humanitarian action. Disasters and crises tend to exacerbate pre-existing gender inequalities, discrimination, and violence. And as a consequence of this, women are disproportionately impacted by disasters and crises. Yet in the Asia-Pacific region, evidence has shown and women are not only vulnerable victims, but they are among the first responders to crisis, and they play crucial roles in building resilience of families, communities, and nations. However, what we have seen is that women are not meaningfully represented in humanitarian planning and decision-making that affect their lives. So we think that women's leadership in humanitarian action can play an important role and have a strong impact on the lives of disaster-affected women, including in ensuring their equal access to relief and services. But beyond this, they can push women's leadership in humanitarian action pushes for transformative change and shifting gender power dynamics. So UN Women, we are promoting women's leadership and gender equality in humanitarian action across response, preparedness, recovery, disaster risk reduction, and resilience in order to bridge this humanitarian development divide that we are all talking much more about recently. So I'm pleased to now hand over to colleagues in Nepal, the UN Women Nepal country office, sitting with the women-friendly disaster management core group of women civil society organizations in Nepal, to share their experiences and pioneering efforts following the devastating earthquakes that happened in Nepal now 2 years ago on 25th April 2015, followed by another earthquake on 12th May 2015. So this important work done in Nepal really demonstrates the impact that women and girls and women's organizations can have as agents of change and leaders in humanitarian action. So I'm now heading over to Saru Joshi Shrestha, Strategic Partnership Specialist with UN Women Nepal.
Thank you, Marie. Hello all, and namaste from UN Women Nepal country office, and also I would like to welcome on behalf of Women-Friendly Disaster Management Core Group of Nepal. You may be aware that Nepal is prone to various disasters like earthquake, landslide, and flood. The 2015 earthquake cost the country 9,000 lives, with women and girls making up 55% of the total. Studies have shown women are more exposed to disaster, yet have less capacity to respond. Women's contribution and leadership in building resilience is in disaster is not well recognized. About 327,000 female-headed household, which is almost 26%, 40,000 women and girls with disability, over 163,000 women over the age of 65 were affected. Earthquake caused more female death, partly because of their gender role, because they are confined to within the household, and because of the male migration as well. So to tell you truth, UN Women Nepal office also did not have any experience to work on disaster. So it was a challenge, but yet opportunity too. Just to share some of the work that UN Women Nepal country office did at that time is that we coordinated with the UN city and formed a joint intercluster gender working group. Then we also provided, input to the humanitarian hubs, to the assessment tools, build the capacity development, helped supported collecting sex and age disaggregated data, provided technical inputs to address gender and social inclusion in the humanitarian hubs, developed gender profiles, and also gender equality updates to reflect the work on women in disaster from various women organizations and also agencies. Uh, we with the when the, at the time National Planning Commission called UN Women to provide technical support in the post-disaster need assessment and also in the post-disaster relief framework. So a separate chapter and also mainstreaming gender into those policy framework was also provided. As we all know, when there is disaster, when there is a crisis, because of women's gender role in other, women are the one who are most affected. So considering all these, I still remember this was the same room on the 5th day of earthquake. We convened a meeting inviting all women leaders and women organizations, and they shared, some of them were very emotional. They said, we do not have any information why there are so many people going here, and there are helicopters, there are English documents disseminated. There are many things going on that, and we don't know where the food are distributed, where the tent are distributed. So that a kind of chaos situation was there, and our women leaders were also very emotional. Some of them were also sharing their experience. Their own organizations house was demolished. There were many dead cases, so we were not in the that situation to we had no clue what to do. And then our women's group, they took a decision to form a core group and started working on responding humanitarian action, technical support to UN Women. I remember the first thing they prepared with the technical support of UN Women was Common Charter of Demand, which was disseminated in many newspapers, was submitted to the government agencies and with development partners. There was a donors group meeting as well where they disseminated that. So, and it's not only that, UN Women also facilitated many meetings to collect guidance from the women's group and shared with the government and other development partners. Uh, and I hope this, and they have their own first-hand experience. When we say that resilience is not really recognized, I think they will be sharing their experience too. This discussion will help us to understand how it is important to engage women's group in all disaster-related response. Having said this, that we have many representatives here from the women's group, 8 representatives along with the coordinator, Ms. Chandni Joshi here. And we also have our country representative, Ms. Veni Kusuma, deputy representative, Gitanjali, and together with other colleagues in this hall. Now, I would like to invite the chair of the Women Friendly Disaster Management Core Group, Ms. Chandni Joshi. Ms. Joshi served Nepal government for 22 years as a joint secretary, and she was also former regional director of UNIFEM South Asia. Presently, she serves as a think tank member at the Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare. And most importantly for us, she is our civil society advisory group member.
Well, I think in the background also we heard that whenever it comes to, especially during disaster, the gender issues get lost, or it comes like a afterthought. People think about it later. So we were very fortunate to get together, though it was a diverse group, but we got together at the call of UN Women. And today I'm going to share with you the challenges and best practices, what we learned. Since this is a learning session, so we are going to talk about our own learning and also talk about the challenges that still exist today. So you got the facts and figures of, there's a PowerPoint presentation that will be shared, is being shared, right? Okay, it's being shared. So I'll skip the data because Sarva has already talked about it, and also the emergence of the women's core group. I think we were very fortunate in terms of, I remember when we sat in this same room, there were two shops, and there was a drill, as the bells go on in the UN, so we had to run out twice during that, and we were all getting phone calls, everyone from home calling us and saying come back. But we thought, we have to put our thoughts and minds together and commit ourselves. So we, 8 of us, we committed ourselves: BBC, PEDO, FWLD, Homeless South Asia, Jagran Nepal, MAG, Media Advocacy Group, Sathi, and WHR, Women for Human Rights. These were the organizations that we got together, and we continued our journey. The journey was quite challenging because we were trying to negotiate a platform. We were also trying to be watchdogs. We were trying to be agents of change, and we were doing advocacy with full strength of all the 8 organizations. So what we tried, the uniqueness of the core group was that we tried to place women in the center stage of all the initiatives. That's the government, the international organizations, the UN, and the NGOs were doing. And the synergized strength of the 8 organizations resulted, no doubt, in strong advocacy, effective advocacy, and good lobbying. And the representation of the diverse group, though in the small video you saw, it was there, but still I would want to introduce them. As a group works on the Dalit issues, that's the excluded women's issues. One institution works on violence against women, the other on media, on legal sector, single women, and economic empowerment. So just to show you that it's a diverse group. It's not one homogeneous group, but we got together. And we used a two-pronged approach. One was a synergized advocacy, as I said earlier, for gender-responsive disaster response as well as preparedness. And whereas on the other hand, it was to provide assistance within our reach. And we came up with a common chart of demand within 2 weeks. We came up with that, and we had many meetings, to come out with the actual wording, because we were stressing on women's representation and leadership in the overall process that the government and the UN was doing. So we developed this common charter of demand for gender equality and empowerment of women in the post-disaster humanitarian response in Nepal. And this was widely circulated. Not only circulated in terms of sending it in meetings, but we went to hand it over. In one meeting that UN Women was organizing, we were able to hand over this ourselves. And I remember reading paragraph after paragraph. All of us, we all shared one paragraph each, and we shared with 7 ministries and the National Planning Commission, which was working on the PDNA. And it was very well taken. And similarly, we shared with other government agencies, ministries, international and bilateral organizations, and also with the NGOs. And it was, we carried loads of our Charter of Demand to Geneva and Istanbul during the Humanitarian Summit, and also at the Regional Asia Pacific Conference on Gender and Disaster Risk Reduction in Vietnam, and at the CSW, 61st CSW in New York, also at It was shared widely in the Asia Pacific Regional Dialogue on the Grand Bargain on 20th February 2017. And similarly, it was shared in Geneva on 21st February. Now, one of our colleagues, Bhavita, will be going to Sussex and will be sharing this in the Grand Bargain and localization which is being organized in West Sussex in June. So what I'm trying to say is, we have widely circulated and shared, and also talked about what has been achieved and what the challenges lie. And 1 year after, 1 year after the earthquake, we were able to bring in 100 women from all the 14 affected districts, and we had a soul searching exercise. It was a 3-day meeting. We planned it accordingly. The first day we all sat and we cried on each other's shoulders because people were talking about loss that is irreparable. And on the second day, you could see the resilience. The women were already talking about building back the community, building back their houses. And on the third day, believe me, they were talking about we can build the nation. We have that, the commitment. We could see that. During that meeting, we came out with the Kathmandu Declaration, which has become a common voice of women in Nepal in advocating for mainstreaming gender equality and empowerment issues in recovery and reconstruction process. So it's a standard already set. And it also pledged for equal participation in leadership positions, like 50-50 inclusively across Nepal. And it advocated for gender responsive disaster management bill. And that was very well accepted. And we, in the concluding session, I remember the Home Minister was there, and so was the NRA, the National Reconstruction Authority, were all there. So key people were there, and the women had first-hand dialogue with them, and they were able to present the Kathmandu Declaration to them. And of course, as I said, we also worked on humanitarian responses. And I think I should say a little bit about this because it was not the usual kind of thing, though the immediate distribution was usual. So, what was very unique was the construction of temporary shelters were made, and tailor-cut capacity building trainings were conducted, like women's leadership trainings, women empowerment education focused on sexual and reproductive health and rights, skill training that they instantly needed because so many women had already lost their livelihoods. Seed funds were given for income generation, and legal training was provided. And Babita will be talking about this later. Is 11,130 women benefited. They were given psychosocial counseling, livelihood support, referral services, information dissemination, and coordination. This will be shared more later. And there were innovations in the humanitarian response, like Sabah. One institution was able to operate community kitchen just after the earthquake. For 3,000 people, the community kitchen was running for almost 23 days. So the women were free to do other things, that they really needed to put back together. And the establishment of women-friendly space for protection from gender-based violence, purposefully it was done. So there were multi-purpose women centers created, and childcare centers were built, and the community centers, space for women. When I say community centers, this was not just for vocational training, but it was for women to go and breastfeed their children. It was for them to, just change their clothes. And there were women who had never had a bath for more than a month. So it was most women's space. So, and the other unique thing that happened was psychosocial counseling was linked with livelihood training. It wasn't just psychosocial. An information and legal help desk was set up for earthquake affected women in several districts of Nepal. And the other innovation in humanitarian response is advocated to incorporate the voice of vulnerable women, groups of women, women living with disabilities, and LGBTI in interagency standing committee. Gender handbook also it was incorporated. These are examples of mainstreaming, and JC concerns were raised to incorporate in DRR bills. And our learning was shared in many platforms. One was, the South Asian Peer Learning Consultation was organized by UN Women in Nepal on gender responsive DRR, and this was a success case study that was shared. And similarly, Murray, you remember, we had shared this at the Asia Pacific Regional Stakeholders Consultation Workshop, Resilience and Gender Equality. Well, now there might be questions like, since it's a learning exercise we are doing, so what were the strategies that we took? So the strategy was that just one institution cannot provide everything. We have to join hands, we have to be united. And the advocacy and humanitarian activities were accomplished in cooperation, coordination, and technical support, both from the government, the UN organizations, and I would say the donors, and especially the local communities. Because one of the things, that came out whenever we met the women's group, the women, from the affected districts, was community, building the community, empowering the community is key factor. Because before aid comes, it's them, who give us support. So that was one of the biggest learning that we have learned. The local women mobilized themselves and participated in disaster response activities, which has enhanced their skill and self-esteem and proved themselves as active actors in disaster management. And this is, I would say, a built human resource that will be able to function later too. And what has been the achievements is, it's very easy to talk about mainstreaming. Mainstreaming doesn't happen automatically. You have to make all efforts to it. So we are very happy and proud to say that we made 2 dents. One is through effective lobbying and advocacy. The Women's Core Group provided valid inputs in the Post-Disaster Need Assessment, PDNA, which now has a separate JC chapter. And it is well known as a very gender responsive exercise itself. And we advocated to have a separate chapter on gender equality and social inclusion in recovery under the implementation arrangements for recovery and reconstruction of the post-disaster recovery and reconstruction framework, which is also very, very vital. After several interventions, here I want to stress on several interventions, not at one go, the NRA has taken up, have incorporated indicators on gender and social inclusion in its monitoring system. And very proudly, we'd like to say that successfully, we have included a separate chapter on gender and disaster in the CEDAW Shadow Report of Nepal for the first time in history. And the achievements, it seems it's going on and on. I would want to just give you examples that we have not lost an opportunity. Wherever there is, an opportunity, we try to gather the voices, the concerns of the women, put it together. This was in the position paper that was shared at the regional meeting. And also when there are panel discussions, we make sure that, this comes up again and again. And one of the achievements is quoted as 4 members of. Now, as I said earlier, the ownership of the communities and women's group is very vital, and participation of diverse group. And here I would want to say that timely and proactive and strong advocacy at all levels is another thing that we felt was very important. And we were advocating for gender issues in disaster period is a Herculean task. It's not easy. We have to probe, we have to negotiate, you have to find the space, sometimes push yourself in. So it hasn't been that easy. And we also need sufficient, need for sufficient, timely and flexible budgetary provisions. But the biggest lesson that we have learned in this whole process is that coming together is the beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. So you see all of us here still. Savinji is missing from this, I see. The last photograph, though we are there and we have shared. We have shared this not only at the Humanitarian Summit, but we have shared this with the press in Nepal, we have shared it with the women's group, and we have also shared it with the parliamentarians and politicians. that these, could be good practices that could be used later. Let's hope there'll be no disaster in Nepal. But if anything happens, even for DRR, these are factors that can be considered. Well, thank you so much for your patience. And all my friends are here. I spoke on behalf of all of them. So if any question, they'll all be happy to answer.
Thank you, Chandni. Now we have a second presenter, Mr. Mr. Sabin Shrestha. He is the Executive Director of Forum for Women Law and Development. In short, it is FWLD. The FWLD is a prominent organization working on promoting policies, laws to promote gender equality and women's empowerment. Besides that, FWLD is also known as a secretariat to prepare CEDAW report. And through the core group, Mr. Sabin and FWLD were intensively engaged in promoting, gender concerns in the disaster management bill and other policies. So now I invite Mr. Sabin Shrestha.
Thank you very much, Sharudidi. Greetings from Nepal. This is the very good opportunity for me to share some of the work we did through Women-Friendly Disaster Management Core Group. I would like to start a little bit with introducing the disaster-related law in Nepal. In Nepal, prior to 1982, there wasn't any well-structured policy relating to disaster in Nepal. First time in Nepal in 1982, the government enacted Natural Calamity Rescue Act. And this act is not first in Nepal, but also the first in the whole region, in the South Asian regions. So through the introduction of this act, the first time the institutional approach to responding to disaster management in the country was set up. Though this was a first law, there was various gaps in the law, especially from the gender perspective. As the name itself suggests, the Natural Calamity Rescue Act, it's very much confined within the rescue and immediate relief. So this law does not cover the preparedness and risk management, as well as this law does not cover the later part like rehabilitation and reconstruction phase. So itself, this is a very confined legal mandate within this law. And also because it's enacted little long time ago, it's more from the welfare approach based rather than the right based approach. And this law also, this law proposed various disaster management institution mechanism, disaster relief committees, and all those institution at the central level, at the regional level, as well as at the local level. But mostly all this mechanism is ex officio members. So mostly all these committees is from the government agency. So very few scope for the civil society or other peoples. And even within the government structure, ex officio members, it's mostly the other ex officio rather than the women related institution. Even at the central level, there is no representation of the ministry like Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare, and very same as at the regional level as well as the local level. And also this act is completely silent about addressing the special need of special classes, not only women but also other classes like children, elderly people, person with disabilities. So in this setup, what we did, the Women Friendly Disaster Management Core Group, we prepare with the support of the UN Women, we prepared the lobbying document regarding the gender responsive legal framework. And this is the one of the agenda of Women Core Group that we need. When we talked about the disaster and the response to the disaster, we need the women responsive disaster management law. And not only the law is very much silent, but because of the discrimination exists in Nepal, even the gender neutral provision is implemented gender discriminatory. Because very sadly in Nepal we have a gender discriminatory law. If we see the Citizenship Act, Citizenship Act only allow to confer the citizenship through father or through husband. And because of that, the women denied the independent identity. And after this disaster, after the last earthquake, all the relief work, all the reconstruction work, whatever the relief package and reconstruction package distributed based on the citizenship certificate. And as the women were denied the equal right in the citizenship certificate, that impacted the women access towards these relief packages and the reconstruction packages. And not only that, because of the mindset of, as Chandni already mentioned, the patriarchal mindset of, there is a very discriminatory practice regarding the relief and reconstruction distribution. Even to consider the household, head of household, they consider the man as a head of household, but they did not consider the woman as a head of household. So there is some of the BDC, they said that until and unless the unmarried daughter became age of 60, they don't consider she can be the independent head of household. So, and even the single woman, they didn't consider the head of household for all those benefits. And very unfortunately, the grandmother was not entitled, but the grandson was considered as a head of household. So that's the mindset of we observed in last earthquake. And not only that, what we observed that the situation of gender-based violence. So the disaster make the women more vulnerable for the gender-based violence. So there is a lots of incident of domestic violence, particularly all the relief and the benefit package given to man, and the man, they monopoly, they utilize or disutilize, whatever you say, they utilize in the drinking or whatever. And because there is no sharing of that benefits, there is no consultation with his wife, there is an increase of domestic violence. And also because of the vulnerable situation, there is an increase of the sexual violence, as well as some of the people, they try to capitalize that situation, and the rate of trafficking is also increased. And if we see the government data, the data from the Nepal police, it clearly indicate the before the earthquake and after the earthquake. If we see the government data, it says that there was a 10% increase of the rate of or incident of gender-based violence. Though we can't say that it's just for the disaster, but it's clearly say that shows that there is a increase of gender-based violence. And not only the increase of the gender-based violence, even for the access to justice, women were very much very difficult positions to access the justice. And because my organization, Forum for Women Law and Development, we established legal assistance desks in all 14 districts to provide legal support. We dealt various GBV cases, and to support them, there was a lots of issue. Like one of the cases, that was happened in the Kathmandu, in the center of Kathmandu, in the Turi Hill. That's the center of the Kathmandu. One of the women, she was raped when she was in the temporary shelter in the tent, and the case was filed. In the Kathmandu District Court. And when she went to the Kathmandu District Court to record her statement, Kathmandu District Court did not allow her to record her statement because she did not had her citizenship certificate with her. So because, and she lost her citizenship certificate during the disaster, and within her family there was no male family member, so there was no possibility to obtain the citizenship certificate immediately. And it's like around 10 times we try to argue with the Kathmandu District Court, and again and again we went to the District Court to record her statement. But they said that without a valid identity document, we won't record her statement. And ultimately, we put our license, the lawyer license, as a security to record her statement. And ultimately, the case went to the as a bench in the judge, and judge said that if the woman presented through the Nepal police, they can consider women as a valid victim. So ultimately, we were able to record her statement in the district court. and the district court convict the rape and declared the imprisonment for the 7 years for accused. But it's a very tough. So I'm just telling one example. So the whole process, the violence was increased, and the access was very, very difficult, because at that time even the recording of GBP were denied, because even the police and the this justice mechanism, they were affected as well, very similarly like other common people, and their priority at that time is immediate rescue, relief, and this incident is a small incident. So that was so that was the case. As a group, we prepared the lobbying document, as I mentioned, with the support of UN Women, regarding the gender responsive legal framework. So some of the issue I really want to put out. What are our key issue? One issue we talked about the representations. Why representation? Because right now we have a National Reconstruction Authority, and in the Act of National Reconstruction Authority, it's clearly mentioned that the executive committee, that's the core implementation committee of the Reconstruction Authority, it's clearly mentioned that the executive committee should be nominated following the principle of inclusiveness. But I don't know what type of inclusiveness principle they followed. But 5-member executive committee, all 5 members are men, and they said that they follow the inclusive principle. So what we are now talking about, the new disaster, because right now Nepal is also discussing about the submitting the new disaster management bill. So within the bill, whatever the structure, it should be clearly mentioned that the number of women representation in all those mechanisms, and not only the ex officio representation of women, but also the civil society women members should be there to raise their voice, to bring their voice. And the core group, one of the core issue we are raising is we are trying to build, we are trying to raise the voice of community women. So within this mechanism, the representation of community women is also necessary. So we are one issue is representation in new law we are raising. Another issue is there should be the specific mechanism to address the gender-based violence in the disaster situation. That should be little bit different from the normal setting. And not only that, because if there is somebody who are trying to exploit the situation of disaster, exploit the situation of vulnerability of women, there should be additional punishment than the normal setting. And also what we see that even for the relief packages, distribution of relief and reconstruction packages, there should be the priority for single women, there should be the priority for women, there should be the priority for women headed household disability persons. So priorities should be mentioned, and all these packages should also consider the gender aspects. So it should not only for the general standard, but also consider the women's need within this package. And one of the main issue we are raising that there should be the specific law should spell out that data system with gender disaggregated data system should be there, because right now we have some gender disaggregated data regarding the victim of last earthquake. But if we try to look the gender disaggregated data regarding the beneficiary data regarding the relief holders, they don't have the gender disaggregated data. So whatever follow-up activity, we really need to gender disaggregate data. That should be there. And the policy should mention specifically that there should be the gender analysis of disaster risks, and all the resources, whether it's the government resources under the government or resources under civil society or any other development agency, there should be gender responsive budgeting of all the resources should be clearly there. And what I already mentioned in my beginning, that only disaster management law, we can't stand alone the disaster management law. woman is lag behind from the man in Nepal because of other issue as well, because of patriarchy and because of existing discriminatory laws. So other issue of gender discrimination also need to be addressed if we want to ensure the gender responsive disaster law. So these are my points. So I'm happy to respond if there is any further questions in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Savinji. Now we have a next presenter, Ms. Babita Basnet. She is the president of Media Advocacy Group, and through the Women-Friendly Disaster Management Group, she is flagging the issues of right to information. How important is to establish the information, and she established information center during the disaster in 2 districts, so and 3 districts, and she had also said this local community experience in the humanitarian summit as well. So over to you, Babita ji.
Hi there, Mary, Mary, listening? I think it's not connected. Is it?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Saru. Thank you, Chandiju and all. Well, it was, it's very difficult to remember right now. After 5 days of earthquake, we were gathered here in this meeting hall. I remember, I was thinking when Chandiju and Savinji was talking, and what we talked about that time, it was a very difficult time, and we got called from UN Women, and all we gather here without makeup, without good shoes, without good clothes. And we all were like very disappointed. What will be happen? In future we didn't know anything, and aftershocks were so frequent. So that was the situation that time, and our friends, including Sadhani Diju, they all were talking about gender-friendly disaster response. So how can we do? What kind of work we can do? And even we're talking about sanitary pads and all that, that kind of practical things. And I could not say anything. I didn't say anything that time because of I was thinking, oh God, what can I do? That is not my kind of job. It was, and that night I could not sleep whole night. I was thinking of, what can I do? Something different, something, very practical kind of things. And what we realized, in our, and we met in our office too, but it was very difficult to meet our board and all that. And what we decided with some friends when we talked on the line, and and Mag decided that we have to work in information because we are working in information, women, and media sector. So we realized that that time some foreigners and Nepali donors, they were asking to go to districts and distribute some foods and clothes and tents. They wanted to donate, and they said reliable organization we are looking for. And I said of course this kind of tent, food, and the clothes are very important, but information to know about where can the people can get that kind of foods or tents, or that kind of relief package, that is very important. So we decided to establish 3 information center in the districts. We thought, most devastating district one, Gorkha, and there was in Sindhupalchok and Nuapur. Before that, and I remember when I was I went to Gorkha, and CDO, then CDO Udap Timsena, he asked, okay, so you are going to establish information desk here. I said yes, sir. And he said, okay, what kind of information center it will be? And I said it will be information center focusing with 2 women, and information and 2 women. What kind of center it will be? So information need all men and women equally. They need. And I said yes, we will distribute information to all men and women, but the focusing of women, the meaning of it is if there are some women is confused, and they want to know something about what is happening, or they want to ask something. So our information coordinator will go directly to them and ask them, Ama or Didi, Baini, Bauzu, what are you looking for? Sisters, what are you looking for? And can we can we help you? And if there are men, so they have to come to our information center for asking information. So we established, and after that, some information, many women, they came, men also they came. They wanted to ask about, they lost their certificate, the citizenship certificate, that educational certificate, and they lost their property certificate, land certificate, certificate. So where can they go, and how can it makes again? So we referred, some cases to FWLD. Rightly, Sabin Sreshta, he talked about, they also had information sector about legal decks. Legal decks they established, and some cases we refer to city office, some cases we refer to land management office, some cases refer to WDO, Women Development Office. And I remember, one case. It was in Gorkha. Our government authorities, they wanted to they wanted to give a relief package to one. I mean, they were distributing, and they went to one house. A lady, a woman, elderly woman. She lost her husband and son that time, and she denied to take that relief package by the government, and asking that, and the government people, they asked, why are you are not taking? She said, I lost my husband, and son, so I will not be able to pay you again, this money. It was how much? 15,000, I think. Immediate relief was distributed from the government. And she said, no, I will not be able to pay you back, so I will not take this. She didn't know that it is free, it is for immediate relief by the government. Then that same CDO, he said, oh, you are very right, information is very needed. So he realized that importance of information that time. And what we did that, we mobilized media person as information officer. So they had access to the government authorities and civil societies, Nepal police. They could coordinate with each other, and general people, they had information. They could gather information. And in Sindhu Palchok, government authority, especially Shidio, he asked that, what is happening in the village BTC level, we don't know. So please give us information, not only for the general people. Our information desks, our information coordinators, they were able to give information to the CDO office, to the sometime even Nepal police. Nepal police were asking that, oh, what is happening in this BTC? Do you have any information? They came to ask us. I mean, they came in our information desks, and media persons. They wanted information from our desks. So it was very helpful. It was very, very helpful, and it was very new kind of idea at that time. So the strategy we used, that media persons, and also we wanted to mobilize media, especially community FM radios. They were very helpful to us. And when we talked about media, it was very important role they had that time, especially women journalists. They were and still they are women. They are presenting news as a news reader, and that time it was very helpful to them. Our information text, we provided different kind of information related to women, especially in some cases where it came about gender-based violence as well. I stop here, and I will be happy to respond if any questions. Thank you very much for.
Thank you, Babita. When we talk about the right to information, when we convened the meeting with the women's group, they raised this concern that we are not told, we are not informed what are the committees formed, where are the food distributed, what are the new things, what are the upcoming programs and plans. And then we convened a meeting together with the National Information Commission, inviting National Planning Commission, Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare, and Ministry of Federal Affairs and Local Development, and RTI activists together with the women's group. So there was a face-to-face question and answer, that dialogue forum was also created. That also somehow addressed, that was an opportunity that our women's group had an opportunity to ask question and get response directly. Now we are almost done with the 3 presenters, but we have other representatives of the women core group. They will introduce themselves, and how do we do? They would like to share their experience as well, or shall we go to the questions first?
I think perhaps we can go to question answer round, and then everyone can address the questions that we get from the floor, if that is okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, then we kindly invite everyone to please ask any questions you may have for the Women-Friendly Disaster Management Core Group who have just been presenting. So please ask your question. You can write them, or you can speak using your microphones. If there's no immediate questions, maybe I have a question just to start the discussion, and hopefully others will also join in with questions. Please feel free to ask anything. My immediate question is, thank you so much for all the really useful presentation on all the important work that was done in Nepal after the earthquake, focused on engaging with women, making sure women were informed, that they received the services and support they needed to recover from the disaster. I have an immediate question, which is about, did you feel, as women core group members, did you feel you were engaged by the humanitarian community? So the humanitarian country team, the humanitarian coordination system, how did you feel? Were you engaged? How were you engaged? Or if you weren't engaged by this humanitarian community, humanitarian country team, how would you have liked to have been engaged? Or what do you think could have been key improvements on that? Thank you.
There is another question as well. There is another question. So how have women's leadership role promoted?
Ask the question, and so how has women's leadership role being promoted? And duita questions. साथीहरुका पास गरौँ म Okay, I think there are 2 questions, Mari. The cluster method. The core group was invited to 2 clusters by the UN, and we had gone, our members had gone and shared. What I'm sharing at the moment, they had gone and shared their own experiences and how the group got together and what were our strategies for advocacy that were shared. And there's another question that we saw on the board is how was the leadership, women's leadership kind of promoted was the other question. And on that, a specific part of the Common Charter of Demand, on that we especially stressed on women's representation and leadership. And we have talked about how the gender lens had to be used in the whole humanitarian assistance, kind of process itself. And to be specific, I'm going to read a few. Humanitarian coordination should enable a formal, meaningful consultative forum with women's group networks to ensure gender lens in the assessment, planning, prioritizing, coordination, development, and implementation of the policies and programs. And the second was recovery, relief, and rehabilitation efforts must reflect the voices of women. And this was done because the PDNA, specifically says that because of our request, because of our pledge, They had gone to all the districts and they had talked to the women, got their voices together, and it's very well reflected in the PDNA. That's evidence. And another evidence is, one of the members of the core group is in the advisory council of NRA. So that is another role we can say. And the other thing, that I'm sure the others will be in a better position to respond to this question. But during meetings, during conferences, I have heard that many of these women, who are coming from the affected districts, are contesting for local elections, and some are contesting as assistant mayor, assistant deputy mayor, and some are literally contesting for several positions. So I would call these two examples. And during our soul searching, the seminar we had, and also the when we were preparing the position paper, we were with them for a while, and during that time also, their leadership in terms of not only their resilience and leadership, but their commitment, their courage to say, we can lead the country, we can build the nation, we want to be part of building the nation. Those were very impressive, I would say. And if others would want to add, they're most welcome. Another example, Aurora,
I would like to add regarding the leadership issue in disaster mechanisms. So, new disaster management bill is also not very responsive, we can say, or not that much enthusiastic for us. Because new disaster management bill proposed a different mechanism. Right now, we have only one national disaster management committee, but new disaster management bill proposed one the high-level National Council under the chairpersonship of the Prime Minister. And under the National Council, there is a three different mechanism. Like there is a mechanism for risk mitigation committee, disaster risk mitigation committee, under the leadership of Ministry of Federalism and Local Development. There is a response committee under the leadership of Ministry of Home Office, and they propose the third committee as a recovery committee under the leadership of Ministry of Urban Development and Physical Structure Committee. But unfortunately, there is no representation ensured. Not the women government institution representation is ensured in all these mechanisms. And also there is a provision. It's a good provision that in this committee there should be the member from the civil society or member from the out of the government institutions. And they said that among these civil society members, 5 members should be appointed as a principle of inclusiveness. So they say the principle of inclusiveness, but they still fail to clearly say the minimum number of women. So that is one of the issue for us. So as a core group, we are raising this issue, the ensure representation of women in the disaster management committee and their leadership. And second issue, what I got the question is the address mechanism of gender-based violence during the disaster. So there is no specific mechanism in place, indifferent than the normal setting during the disaster to address gender-based violence. But government, they established 11 cluster, and among the 11 cluster, one of the cluster is the protection cluster. And the protection cluster, the lead organization was Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare, and colleague organization was UNICEF, UNFPA, UNHCR. And this cluster is not only at the central level, but also at the district level. And this cluster is particularly responsible to look after the gender issue as well as the gender-based violence issue. And in addition to that, the credit again goes to the UN Women. UN Women supported to create inter-cluster gender group, and that group also try to make sure that not only the protection cluster but all the cluster also look after the issue of the gender. So there are some good examples, but still we feel that during the disaster period, it's not the normal setting of disaster complaint mechanism is working. So even we need the mobile complaint mechanism, mobile information unit, as Babita ji told. So that was lacking even in our last experience. You battery didn't lie.
Well, trying to answer a question on the clusters, which UN clusters we were member. We were not members, but we were invited as guests. And in the food cluster, Pauraki was invited, and in the gender working group, WHR, one of our partners was invited for those. So we were just guests and not, formal members. And on your other question as to what was, what our input was, especially in the DRR, we had requested for inclusion of single women and women with disability, which is very much incorporated.
I think Noshaba wanted to speak from Plan International.
Yeah, thank you so much and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Noshaba from Plan International Asia Regional Office, Bangkok. It was really very valuable and useful information, and especially listening from all those who were on the front line of emergency response in Nepal. So my question is regarding the women leadership emerged during this emergency response, because looking at the achievement and looking at the all strategies you guys have been adopted during the emergency response. So what kind of women leadership emerged? Because we all know that every disaster, aftermath of the disaster includes the windows of opportunities for us, and how we are going to link those women leaders from the community, affected community, to our development work later on. Yeah. Thank you.
Our friend from WHR is going to answer this question.
Hello and good afternoon. I'm Nirmala from WHR. I'm going to respond so far I understand this query. And what WHR has been doing is we have built one multi-purpose center, community building, and which is already leadership. Yeah, I understand. And then through this community purpose center, we are doing and making the leaders who are survival from the earthquake. And so many young and even the elders, they are using their expertise, their skills, and their doing capacity of labor works. They are becoming a leader. Some of them are in social sector, and some of them are in election also. They are preparing themselves, and we are supporting from our multipurpose center as a leader, because they are running their community and survival from that center. As a single woman, yeah.
Thank you so much. That is good to know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Now, another core group member is going to answer your question on leadership.
Thank you.
Hello everyone. Hi, I'm Srishti from Sabah, Nepal. And out of my experience after the earthquake, after this catastrophe, emerged a lot of community leaders, I feel. And our institution deals with women home-based workers. And out of the 2,500 plus women home-based workers, 700 were affected by the earthquake. And There are two things I wanted to sort of stress here. The leadership qualities that they portrayed right after the earthquake, when they did the community kitchen, feeding the 3,000 people you were already informed earlier. Their self-esteem, their confidence was so built that now, after 2 years of earthquake, what we see in the same community is, because of the help of UN Women Nepal, we are also leading a consortium of 6 excluded women groups, from which people are, the women from the community are also contesting in the local upcoming local elections. So that's the level of confidence that has gone up. And from being a mere a homemaker or a women home-based worker who never stepped out of their home after the earthquake, how they lost all their livelihood, all their inventory, all their machinery that they had at home. It was not just a home, but a workplace that they lost. They have built up the confidence to get out and even contest. That's one thing. And the charter of demand, I wanted to stress here. All the other members have already talked about it. It became such a big blueprint for us, for us who never worked on disaster, because the key points that were spelled out there, we used it as a tool to how does one say, to communicate with our donors who wanted to help us right after the earthquake. And we were able to sort of make 5 new community centers, women-friendly community centers with childcare centers, and that's how our members also, got out of their homes, built up their confidence. They had their children with them, so they were not as scared, even if another earthquake came. So they were able to sort of work on their skills again, although it was very difficult. We had to go through a lot of psychosocial classes. We had to do a lot of hand holding, but in retrospect, those that chart of demand was a big tool to help us through this whole crisis. Yeah, thank you.